Hello, everybody. I'm sure you're all looking forward to the Easter holidays, even though you haven't been back in school for that long. But it's always good to have a holiday. And I'm sure you'll be thinking about some of the things you're going to do. We're going to think about what happened the very first Easter as we start on my PowerPoint for today. When some people think about Easter, they think about daffodils, and of course, there are so many around making the countryside look very beautiful. Easter is a sign of new life, and some of the fields already have lambs that have just been born and just getting used to walking around. Of course, some people are thinking perhaps more especially of Easter eggs and Easter Sunday, and probably everybody will have some eggs in their home on that particular day. But Easter, of course, is not just about spring, not just about new life, certainly not just about eating chocolate. It's about the fact that Jesus died that very first Easter. We're going to Jerusalem and we're going to remember exactly what happened that very first Easter in that great city of Jerusalem. We're going to do that looking at Easter through the eyes of Peter. Palm Sunday has gone. If you're listening and watching this just before the Easter holidays, last Sunday was Palm Sunday when we celebrate Jesus coming into the city of Jerusalem riding on a donkey. On the Thursday evening of that week, Jesus went to a place called the Garden of Gethsemane. It was evening. Jerusalem was very, very crowded. Some people think up to 2 million people had come into the city for a special festival they called the Passover. So there were very few places where you could sleep. But it was April, it was quite warm, and Jesus and his disciples went to the Garden of Gethsemane where they were going to spend the night, the day before what we call Good Friday. Jesus was feeling very sad. He knew everything that was going to happen, and he started to pray about it. He prayed that God would give him help as he went to do God's plan and God's will for his life. But then a great mob of people came. Soldiers, some of the religious rulers, other people who caused trouble, they came and they arrested Jesus. Peter, of course, wasn't very happy about that. Jesus was his special friend, and he wanted to protect Jesus. So out came his dagger or his sword, and he swung it almost in a temper, I think, and he cut off one of the high priest's servant's ears. And Jesus immediately said, Peter, Peter, stop it. Don't do that. I don't want any trouble. I'm going to use various words beginning with the letter F to tell the story. And at the end of this, we'll think about those 10 words that we're going to use. And here's the first. Peter, of course, had to stop fighting. The people who had arrested Jesus took him away. Most of the disciples ran away, scared that they too might be arrested. But Peter wasn't like that. He thought, I'm going to see where they take Jesus. I'm going to make sure that I know where he's going. And then maybe in some way I can help him to escape. So our next word is very easy. The mob took Jesus away. Peter had to follow. Peter was following to see what was going to happen. Well, they took Jesus to a place called the high priest's house. And they took him inside to go through some sort of trial. Peter managed to get into the courtyard of the high priest's house. It was a cold night and there was a fire there. And Peter started to warm his hands by the fire. One of the servant girls came and she said, I recognize you. You're one of the followers of Jesus whom they've just arrested. He's inside in the high priest's house. And Peter, when he heard what that lady was saying, he thought, she knows who I am. Maybe she'll tell the others. Maybe I'll be arrested. Peter was feeling very, very frightened. Not long afterwards, a Roman soldier came by. He looked at Peter, he recognized him, and he said, "You're one of those troublemakers that's always with that Jesus. You're always in trouble, aren't you? It's you. I recognize you." And Peter said, "No, you've got the wrong person. It's not me at all. I've not been with Jesus. I don't know who you're talking about." Sadly, Peter was feeling very, very weak. He couldn't tell the truth. He lied. He'd lied twice, but that wasn't the end. Somebody else came up and had heard the conversation with the Roman soldier, and they said, "I recognize your accent. You don't come from Jerusalem, do you? You come from Galilee. I reckon you're one of the followers of this man Jesus." And when Peter heard that, again he said no. 3 times he had said no. And then there was a very strange sound. I think it was beginning to get daylight. I think the sun was rising, and the cockerels started to crow very loudly, as they do when the sun rises. And when Peter heard that, he suddenly thought, "Oh dear." Jesus said some time ago this evening, if he was taken away, I said I would always go with him. And Jesus said, "No, you won't, Peter. You'll say you don't know me 3 times." And Peter realized that exactly what Jesus had said had taken place. And he had said he didn't know Jesus 3 times. He felt so bad about it. He rushed out of the courtyard of the high priest's house and he started to cry. Even though he was a strong, tough fisherman, he still cried because he thought, "I've let Jesus down." Or to put it in words beginning with the letter F, he had certainly failed him. Well, I'm sure that all of us let people down and we fail people. And if we realize what we've done, then we want to go to them and we want to say, "We're ever so sorry. We shouldn't have said that, or we shouldn't have done that, or we haven't done what we should have done." We want to go and say we're sorry. And Peter wanted to do that. When he realized what he'd done and when he cried about it, he thought, "I must get to Jesus. I must tell him I'm ever so sorry, but I let him down. I said I didn't know him. I told 3 lies." He felt so bad about it. But the problem was this: the crowd took Jesus away, and eventually he went to a man called Pontius Pilate, and he was taken out to a place just outside of the city, and they put him on a cross. And that's where Jesus died. If you can't do something that you want to do, and you really, really want to do it, but it's just not possible, you feel very frustrated. And that's exactly how Peter felt, very frustrated indeed, because of what had happened. Well, the next day, as I've suggested, was Good Friday. That's when Jesus died. And a couple of days afterwards, it was Easter Sunday. And that's where Christians celebrate and churches celebrate this coming Sunday, the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. Peter actually did see him that particular day, and we don't know quite what happened, but maybe that's when Peter was able to say he was very sorry for what he'd done. Sometime afterwards, the disciples didn't know where Jesus was, though they had seen him once or twice since the Easter Sunday. They decided they would go back fishing. Some of them were fishermen and they missed their fishing. They'd given it up to follow Jesus. Now they went back fishing and they spent a whole night fishing in the Sea of Galilee. Unfortunately, however hard they fished, they didn't catch a single fish. Somebody was on the shore that morning as they were bringing their boat in. They were feeling tired and hungry. And he shouted to them, "Have you got any fish?" And they shouted back, "No." If you're feeling tired or hungry and things haven't gone very well for you, then I can imagine you must have felt exactly like those disciples that early morning after a whole night's fishing and catching nothing. They felt absolutely fed up. But the person who was on the shore, when they said we haven't caught anything, and they almost were rude and shouted, "No," he shouted to them, "Try your net on the other side of the boat." And they thought, maybe we ought to do that. And so for the last time, they threw out their net and they started to pull it in. It was so heavy. In fact, the Bible says they caught in that net that morning 153 fish. It was quite amazing. And John, one of Jesus's disciples, said, this is a miracle. And there's only one person who can do miracles. It must be Jesus. And Peter thought, if that's Jesus, I'm going to him. I've still got to say, I'm very, very sorry for what I did. And so Peter jumped out of the boat. And Jesus, when he saw him, said, Peter, get the others. Come, I've got a fire. I've got some bread. I've got some fish. Bring some more fish. Let's have breakfast together. Well, it was a very special time. And when we have a special meal, sometimes we have it at midnight, a bit secretly, I guess. But if it's another time, then we always call that special meal a feast. And that's what they had that particular day. It was a feast. They didn't say much because they knew it was Jesus. He'd come back to life, and here he was, and here they were able to share breakfast with him. When they'd finished, Peter heard Jesus say, I want a word with you. And Peter thought, oh dear, now I'm in trouble. And Peter heard Jesus say, do you really want to follow me? And do you really want to love me? And Peter thought, yes, I do. And the interesting thing is that Jesus asked that question 3 times. And I think Peter would remember that 3 times he had said he didn't really know Jesus at all. In fact, Peter had let Jesus down on several occasions. He'd let Jesus down when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter had been told to pray and he'd fallen asleep. He grabbed his dagger, as we said, and cut off that man's ear. And that was not what Jesus wanted him to do. And then he denied him. But 3 times Peter said to Jesus, yes, Lord, I do want to follow you. I do want to be one of your disciples. Please have me back. And Jesus looked at him. And when he realized that Peter was really sorry, I'm quite sure Jesus said to him, Peter, I'm prepared to forgive you. Peter was forgiven. We don't know exactly where that happened, but it may well have been, here's the Sea of Galilee, and there's a church, and inside that church there's a rock. And people think it was on that rock that Jesus had a fire, and that's where he cooked the fish and had the bread available so that he could give it to his disciples. This may be the very place where they had breakfast. And I think when they'd finished and Peter realized that Jesus had forgiven him, then Jesus looked at Peter and Peter looked at Jesus and said, let's be friends. And that's exactly what they were. 10 words. Let's see if we can remember them. I'll help you as best as I can. Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. A mob come to capture him and arrest him. And Peter grabs his sword. And Jesus says to him, Peter, stop fighting. They took Jesus away. He was going to be tried and put to death. And Peter didn't know where he was going to go. So he decided there was only one thing to do. He must be following Jesus and finding out where he was going. And he came to the high priest's house. He got by the fire, and there he was able to warm his hands. But 3 people came. All of them said, you're a follower of Jesus. And he became so frightened that sadly he told a lie. That morning, as you remember, the cockerel crowed, and Peter remembered what Jesus had said would happen had actually happened. And when he felt that, he realized he'd let Jesus down. Big word, important word. When we let somebody down, we have failed. And I said, well, when that happens, really, we should want to say, I'm sorry. I haven't done what I should have done, or I said the wrong thing. But if you can't do that, and Peter couldn't do that because Jesus was captured, he was guarded by soldiers, there was no way that Peter could get to speak to him. He felt so frustrated that he couldn't actually say to Jesus he was sorry. Well, Good Friday passed by, Easter Sunday passed by. Some of the disciples decided they were going to go and do something. They really felt they had to do something to take their mind of all that had happened. So they went fishing. They fished for a whole night. They were bringing the boat into the shore. They were tired, they were hungry, and they caught not one single fish. They were feeling absolutely fed up. But the person on the shore told them to try the other side of the net, the other side of the boat with the net. And they did that. And they caught 153 fish. And when they did that, suddenly Peter realized that that was Jesus. And out of the boat he ran. He wanted to be near to Jesus. And Peter said, bring the others. I've got bread. I've got fish cooking. And they had a great breakfast, or a wonderful feast. Afterwards, Jesus said, a word with you, Peter. Peter, do you really want to be my follower? Do you really want to be my disciple and be close to me? And of course, Peter said, yes. And you remember Jesus asked the question 3 times. And 3 times Peter said, yes, yes, yes. And Jesus looked at him. He realized how sorry Peter was for what he'd done, letting him down, taking his sword and cutting off that man's ear, and sleeping when he should have kept awake. And Jesus said, Peter, you're forgiven. We took you to the place where we think it all happened, by the Sea of Galilee. And I said, I think Peter looked at Jesus, and Jesus looked at Peter and said, let's be friends. Whenever I've told this story in schools, I've always asked the children to think, which is the most important word on the board now, on the screen? And I guess there have been some who've been thinking about Easter eggs and thinking all they were going to enjoy at Easter time. And they've said feast was the most important word. But of course it's not. Maybe somebody was feeling they'd had a bad day and they said fed up was the most important word. But of course it's not. I think the most important word is forgiven. And that's really the message of Easter. We sing a song sometimes, a hymn, which says, he died that we might be forgiven. He died to make us good. We want to be a friend of Jesus and to follow him if we believe that that's important. And that's really the whole message of Easter. So as we come to the end of the Easter story, it's really just my privilege to say, I hope you have a really great holiday. I hope you enjoy your Easter time and think perhaps what happened that very first Easter, and hopefully maybe during the summer term I'll be able to come into school and actually speak to you in assembly, as I've been doing for so many years. We should look forward to that and hope it won't be too long before it can happen. Happy Easter to everybody.